1. The Ledger Boy. Picture a wooden desk in a farmhouse in Richford, New York, sometime in the 1840s. The desk is small, built for a child, and on it sits a leather-bound ledger with ruled columns and careful handwriting. A boy of 7 or 8 years old sits there in the evening light, recording every penny he's earned from selling turkeys to neighbors, every cent he's loaned to a local farmer at 7% interest. He updates the numbers each week. He never makes an error. His name is John Davison Rockefeller, and he will never forget the feeling of a balanced account. But first, he has to survive his father, William Avery. Rockefeller is a man of enormous charm and zero reliability. He calls himself a doctor, though he has no medical training. He sells patent medicines and herbal cures from town to town, sometimes disappearing for months at a time. When he returns, he brings money, cash that seems to appear from nowhere, and he brings stories. He tells young John that the secret to success is to trade with people and get the best of them. He makes it sound like a game. He makes it sound like wisdom. But William also leaves his wife Eliza to raise 5 children on almost nothing. She is a Baptist, stern and devoted, and she teaches John a different lesson, that order and discipline and faith are the only things that hold chaos at bay. While his father is a gambler and a drifter, his mother is a woman who believes that God sees every action, every thought, every unearned dollar. John absorbs both lessons. He learns to want money with his father's hunger and to organize it with his mother's rigor. The family moves frequently, always one step ahead of debts or rumors. They settle for a while in Owego, New York, then move to Moravia, then finally to Strongsville, Ohio. John is quiet in school, deliberate, not particularly popular. Other boys play baseball and get into fights. John works. He raises turkeys. He digs potatoes. He lends money to neighbors and collects the interest in a little notebook. By the time he is 12, he has saved $50, a significant sum for a child in the 1850s. He lends it to a farmer at 7% annual interest, and when the farmer pays him back with $3.50 in profit, John realizes something that will guide the rest of his life. Money, if you are patient and careful, can make more money while you sleep. The Rockefellers move again, this time to Cleveland, a rough Great Lakes port city that smells of fish and coal smoke and ambition. John is 16. His father is gone more often than not, and the family has begun to suspect that William has another family somewhere else, another wife, another set of children he supports with money that should go to them. John never speaks of this betrayal, not in public, not in his letters, not even in old age. But he stops expecting anything from his father, except disappointment. He enrolls in a 10-week business course at Folsom's Commercial College. He learns penmanship, bookkeeping, basic banking principles, and the art of negotiation. He is a spectacular student, not because he is naturally brilliant, but because he approaches learning the way a mason approaches a wall, one brick at a time, nothing left to chance. He memorizes procedures. He practices his signatures until they are flawless. He dresses carefully, always in a dark suit, always with a clean collar, because he understands that appearance is part of credibility. In September of 1855, John begins looking for work. He is 16 years old, tall and thin, with sharp blue eyes and a habit of speaking only when he has something useful to say. He walks into every business in downtown Cleveland and asks for a position. Most turn him away. He is too young, too inexperienced, too serious. But on September 26th, a commission merchant and produce shipper named Hewitt Tuttle offers him a job as an assistant bookkeeper. Years later, Rockefeller will celebrate September 26th as Job Day, a personal holiday more important to him than his own birthday. He earns 50 cents a day. He arrives early and stays late. He never complains and never makes mistakes. Within months, Hewitt Tuttle come to rely on him completely because John has a gift that is rarer than intelligence. He is absolutely trustworthy. In a world of cheats and shortcuts and crooked scales, John Rockefeller's ledgers are perfect. His word is granite. But he is also learning something else. He sees how the business works, how produce and goods flow through Cleveland's port, how money moves from farmers to merchants to distant buyers in New York and Philadelphia. He sees the margins, the risks, the inefficiencies, and he begins to realize that the men he works for, while decent and hardworking, are thinking too small. They respond to the market. They don't control it. John wants to control it. By 1858, he has saved enough money to go into business for himself. He is 19 years old. He approaches a young Englishman named Morris Clark, and together they form a partnership. Clark Rockefeller, commission merchants in grain, hay, meats, and miscellaneous goods. John contributes $800, most of it borrowed from his father, at 10% interest, a rate that would make most people furious, but which John accepts because he knows he can make the money grow faster than the debt. The business does well. John is cautious, methodical, relentless. He builds relationships with farmers and buyers. He underpromises and overdelivers. He keeps the books immaculate. At night, alone in the office, he goes over the numbers again and again, looking for patterns, looking for edges, looking for the invisible seams in the marketplace where a disciplined man can slip through and emerge on the other side with a fortune. And then, in 1859, something happens that will change his life and the life of the nation. A man named Edwin Drake drills a well in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and strikes oil. Chapter 2. Cleveland and the First Fortune. The oil comes up black and thick, smelling of sulfur and possibility. In Pennsylvania, men are calling it black gold, and they are flooding into towns like Titusville and Oil City with the same fever that sent prospectors to California a decade earlier. Derricks rise in fields that grew corn the year before. Fortunes are made in a week and lost in a day. The ground itself seems to be leaking money. John Rockefeller hears the stories, and he does not rush to Pennsylvania. This is important. This is the first hint of the pattern that will define him. While other men gamble on drilling, John studies the numbers, and what he sees is chaos. Oil prices swing wildly. $3 a barrel one month, 10 cents the next. Drillers strike rich wells that run dry within a year. The roads are so thick with mud that barrels of oil sit rotting because no one can transport them to market. Fortunes are being made, yes, but most of them are being lost. John does not want to drill. He wants to refine. Here is the insight that will make him the richest man in the world. Oil, as it comes from the ground, is almost useless. It must be heated, distilled, separated into kerosene for lamps, lubricants for machines, paraffin for candles, gasoline, which in the 1860s is considered a waste product and often dumped into rivers. The real value is not in finding oil, but in turning it into something people will pay for, and doing it cheaper and more efficiently than anyone else. In 1863, John and Maurice Clark invest $4,000 in a refinery on the outskirts of Cleveland with a man named Samuel Andrews, a skilled chemist who understands the distillation process. The refinery is modest, just one of dozens in Cleveland, which is fast becoming a hub of the oil trade because of its railroads and access to Great Lakes shipping. John does not run the refinery day to day. Andrews does. But John runs the business side with a precision that borders on obsession. Note, he negotiates with railroads for better shipping rates. He buys sulfuric acid and other chemicals in bulk to lower costs. He reinvests every spare dollar into expanding the refinery, buying better equipment, improving the efficiency of the stills. Other refiners are content to make a decent profit. John wants to dominate. He believes that in a chaotic industry, the man who brings order will win everything. Then comes the Civil War, and everything accelerates. The war creates enormous demand for oil, for lubricants to keep factory machines running, for kerosene to light military camps, for paraffin to waterproof tents and supply wagons. Prices spike. Refiners who can deliver product make extraordinary profits. And John, who has always been cautious, now sees an opportunity so vast that caution itself becomes a risk. He begins to expand aggressively. He borrows money from Cleveland banks, using his reputation for honesty and his immaculate financial records as collateral. He buys out smaller refineries. He hires more workers. He builds larger storage tanks so he can hold oil when prices are low and sell when they rise. Every dollar he makes, he pours back into the business. Number E. But there is a problem, and the problem is Maurice Clark. Clark is a good man, prudent and fair, but he is terrified by the pace of John's expansion. He thinks they are overextending, borrowing too much, risking everything on an industry that could collapse at any moment. The two men argue, quietly at first, then more openly. John wants to borrow another $100,000 to expand further. Clark refuses. In February of 1865, with the Civil War nearing its end, the partnership reaches a breaking point. They agree to an auction. They will bid against each other for full ownership of the refinery, and whoever bids highest will buy out the other's share. The auction takes place in a Cleveland office. Maurice Clark bids cautiously, raising the price in small increments. John bids calmly, without hesitation, his face showing nothing. The price climbs to $50,000, then $60,000, then $70,000. Clark hesitates. John bids $72,500, a staggering sum, more than the refinery is probably worth, money he does not have. Clark stares at him. Then he says, "The business is yours." John shakes his hand. He shows no triumph, no relief. He simply nods and walks out to begin the work of borrowing $72,500. He is 25 years old. Within a year, he will rename the company Rockefeller Andrews. Within 2 years, it will be the largest refinery in Cleveland. Within 5 years, it will be the largest refinery in the world. But size alone will not be enough. What John understands, what almost no one else in the oil industry understands yet, is that the refining business is built on a knife's edge. Profit margins are thin. A small advantage in cost, in transportation, in efficiency, can mean the difference between fortune and bankruptcy. And so John begins to think about not just running a refinery, but controlling every element of the process that determines whether a refinery succeeds or fails. Number 1. He approaches the railroads. In 1867, there are 3 major rail lines shipping oil out of Cleveland: the New York Central, the Erie, and the Pennsylvania Railroad. They compete viciously for business, and John plays them against each other. He promises volume, huge, reliable shipments, in exchange for lower rates. The railroads agree because a guaranteed customer is worth more than a fluctuating one. Suddenly, Rockefeller's shipping costs are lower than his competitors. He can sell kerosene for less and still make a larger profit. Other refiners notice. They complain. They call it unfair. John does not care about fairness. He cares about survival. He also begins to integrate backward into the supply chain. He buys his own tank cars so he is not dependent on the railroad's equipment. He purchases forests to supply wood for barrels. He builds his own barrel-making factory, cutting the cost of barrels by nearly half. He hires chemists to extract more kerosene from each barrel of crude, reducing waste. Every inefficiency he eliminates is a small edge, and he hunts inefficiencies the way other men hunt game. By 1870, Rockefeller Andrews is producing more than 1,500 barrels of refined oil per day. John is wealthy now, a prominent figure in Cleveland business circles. He lives comfortably, but not extravagantly. He gives 10% of his income to his Baptist church. a tithe he has maintained since his first paycheck as a bookkeeper. He marries a schoolteacher named Laura Celestia Spellman, called Seti, a woman as devout and disciplined as he is. They have 4 children. John does not drink or smoke. He rarely socializes. His life is his work, and his work is becoming something unprecedented. But the oil industry is still chaos. There are too many refineries, too much production, wild swings in price. John looks at this chaos and sees waste, inefficiency, ruin. He believes that competition, in its raw form, is destructive. He believes that what the industry needs is not more competition, but less. What it needs is order. What it needs is consolidation. What it needs, though he does not say this aloud, is him. In 1870, John Rockefeller founds a new company with Samuel Andrews, his brother William Rockefeller, and a brilliant and ruthless businessman named Henry Flagler. The company is called Standard Oil of Ohio, capitalized at $1 million. Its stated purpose is to refine petroleum. Its unstated purpose is to control the entire oil industry. And standing in a Cleveland office late at night, looking at maps of rail lines and refinery locations, John Rockefeller begins to plan the most audacious corporate campaign in American history. He is 30 years old, and he is just beginning. Chapter 3: The Standard Oil Machine. There is a photograph of John D. Rockefeller from around 1872. He is 33 years old, seated in a high-backed chair, wearing a dark suit and a thin tie. His face is lean, almost ascetic, and his eyes are calm and unreadable. He does not smile. He looks like a minister or a schoolmaster, not a man who is about to swallow an entire industry. But that is exactly what he is about to do. Standard Oil begins with a simple premise. The refining business is broken. There are too many refineries, more than 25 in Cleveland alone, perhaps 250 across the country, and most of them are poorly run, undercapitalized, vulnerable to the wild price swings that come with overproduction. When crude oil prices drop, refiners scramble to sell kerosene at a loss just to keep operating. When prices spike, they cannot afford enough crude to meet demand. The result is waste, chaos, and widespread failure. John believes this is immoral. Not immoral in the sense of being wicked, but immoral in the sense of being inefficient. And to John Rockefeller, inefficiency is a kind of sin. He looks at the oil industry and sees a machine that is destroying value instead of creating it. And he decides that the solution is not better competition, but the elimination of competition altogether. He begins with Cleveland. Standard Oil in 1870 is already the largest refinery in the city, but large is not enough. John wants totality. He wants every refinery in Cleveland, either owned by Standard Oil or driven out of business. And so he begins a campaign that will later be called the Cleveland Massacre, though at the time it feels less like a massacre and more like a series of quiet, polite conversations in wood-paneled offices. John and Henry Flagler, his partner, a man as ambitious and unsentimental as John himself, visit the owners of competing refineries one by one. They bring ledgers, balance sheets, cost analyses. They explain, calmly and without emotion, that the refining business is about to get much harder. Overproduction is going to drive prices down. Railroads are going to favor larger shippers. Smaller refineries will not survive. Then they make an offer. Sell to Standard Oil now, and you will receive cash or stock in the company. Your employees will keep their jobs. Your refinery will be folded into a larger, more efficient operation. You will be part of something that will dominate the industry for decades. Refuse, and you will be crushed. John does not say the second part out loud, but he does not need to. The numbers say it for him. Standard Oil has negotiated shipping rates with the railroads that are 30 to 50% lower than what smaller refineries pay. It has access to capital that allows it to buy crude oil in enormous quantities at discount prices. it has chemists who extract more kerosene from each barrel of crude than anyone else in the industry. A small refinery cannot compete with that. It can only die slowly or sell quickly. Most of them sell. In 18 months, between 1872 and early 1873, Standard Oil absorbs 22 of its 26 competitors in Cleveland. The 4 that refuse to sell are subjected to a systematic campaign of pressure. Standard Oil undercuts their prices, forcing them to sell kerosene at a loss. It uses its leverage with the railroads to delay their shipments or charge them higher rates. It spreads rumors that they are on the verge of bankruptcy, making it impossible for them to borrow money. One by one, they fail. By 1873, Standard Oil controls nearly 90% of the refining capacity in Cleveland. And Cleveland, because of its location and rail connections, is the refining center of the United States. John is now the most powerful figure in the American oil industry, and almost no one outside of Cleveland knows his name. But he is not finished. Cleveland was a test, a proof of concept. Now he begins to expand outward, into Pittsburgh, into Philadelphia, into New York, into the oil regions of Pennsylvania themselves. The method is the same everywhere. Negotiate from a position of overwhelming strength. Offer generous terms to those who cooperate, and destroy those who resist. In Pittsburgh, he absorbs the city's largest refineries in a matter of months. In the oil region of Pennsylvania, where drillers and small refiners have always seen themselves as independent and unbeholden to anyone, he faces more resistance. They call him a monopolist, a tyrant, an enemy of free enterprise. John does not argue with them. He simply continues to refine oil more cheaply and efficiently than they can, and he waits for them to fail. Some sell out of pragmatism. Others sell out of exhaustion. A few hold out for years, running their operations at a loss, sustained by pride and stubbornness, and a belief that the oil industry should remain a place where a man with grit and a good well can make a living. John admires their determination, but he does not let it slow him down. Because here is what John understands that his competitors do not. This is not personal. It is structural. The refining business, as it exists in the 1870s, cannot sustain hundreds of small operators. The profit margins are too thin, the capital requirements too high, the logistics too complex. Consolidation is inevitable. The only question is who will do the consolidating. John has decided it will be him. He is relentless, but he is not reckless. He expands carefully, never overextending, always ensuring that Standard Oil's finances are sound before moving into a new market. He plows profits back into the business, better equipment, more storage capacity, faster transportation. He hires the best managers he can find and gives them autonomy as long as they deliver results. He creates a corporate culture built on efficiency, secrecy, and absolute loyalty. And he begins to think about not just refining, but everything that touches refining. The railroads that ship the oil, the pipelines that carry it from the wells, the barrels it is stored in, the markets it is sold to. John sees the entire industry as a single, interconnected system, and he wants Standard Oil to control every critical point in that system. This is what will later be called vertical integration, though in the 1870s there is no term for it yet. John is inventing a new form of capitalism, one that does not simply compete in a market, but redesigns the market itself to eliminate competition. It is brilliant. It is terrifying. And it works. By 1875, Standard Oil refines more than half of all the oil produced in the United States. Its kerosene lights lamps in London, Paris, Shanghai, Calcutta. The company's red barrels are recognized around the world. John Rockefeller, who began as a bookkeeper earning 50 cents a day, is now worth millions of dollars, and his wealth is growing exponentially. But there is a problem, and the problem is visibility. The more powerful Standard Oil becomes, the more enemies it makes. Independent refiners, drillers, railroad executives who feel betrayed, politicians who see the company as a threat to democratic capitalism, all of them are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. How did one company gain so much power so quickly? What deals were made in secret? What laws were bent or broken? And there is one deal in particular, one audacious and nearly catastrophic scheme that will bring all of this into the open and almost destroy John Rockefeller before he can finish building his empire. It begins with the railroads, and it begins with a secret. Chapter 4. The South Improvement Scheme. Winter, 1872. In a private railcar on the Pennsylvania Railroad, a group of men are drafting a contract that will nearly ignite a civil war in the oil regions. The men represent the three major railroads that ship oil out of Pennsylvania: the Pennsylvania, the Erie, and the New York Central, and they represent a small group of the largest refiners, including John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil. What they are proposing is breathtaking in its audacity, and to everyone outside the room, its cruelty. They are creating a company called the South Improvement Company. On paper, it is a shipping alliance. In reality, it is a cartel designed to control the entire oil industry. Here is how it will work. The railroads will dramatically raise their shipping rates for oil, doubling them in some cases. But members of the South Improvement Company, Standard Oil, and a handful of other large refiners will receive rebates that bring their costs back down to the original rates, or even lower. And here is the brilliant, vicious twist. They will also receive drawbacks, payments taken from the shipping fees that their competitors pay. Let that settle for a moment. Standard Oil will not only pay less to ship its oil than its competitors, it will actually be paid a portion of what its competitors spend to ship theirs. John Rockefeller did not invent the South Improvement Scheme. It was largely the creation of a group of Pennsylvania refiners and railroad executives who wanted to bring order to the chaotic oil markets. But John saw its potential immediately. With the South Improvement Company in place, Standard Oil would have an insurmountable advantage. Small refiners would be paying twice as much to ship their oil, and part of that money would be flowing directly into Standard Oil's accounts. They would be funding their own destruction. The contract is signed in secret. The railroads agree, the refiners agree, and for a few weeks it seems like the plan will work. But then someone talks. In February of 1872, the details of the South Improvement Scheme leak to the press. The reaction in the oil regions of Pennsylvania is immediate and explosive. Drillers and independent refiners see the plan for what it is: an attempt by the largest refiners and the railroads to strangle everyone else out of the business. Public meetings are held in town squares. Effigies of railroad executives are burned. There is talk of violence, of sabotage, of shutting down the oil wells entirely until the scheme is canceled. John Rockefeller becomes the focus of much of the rage, because by now it is clear that Standard Oil is the largest beneficiary of the plan. In the oil region, his name is spoken with hatred. He is called a conspirator, a thief, a traitor to the independent spirit that built the oil industry. Newspapers publish furious editorials. One writer calls the South Improvement Scheme the most gigantic and daring conspiracy a free country ever saw. The backlash is so intense that within 6 weeks, the Pennsylvania state legislature revokes the South Improvement Company's charter. The scheme collapses before it can be fully implemented. The railroads, embarrassed and under political pressure, publicly disavow the plan. John Rockefeller says almost nothing. He does not defend himself in the press. He does not apologize. He simply waits for the storm to pass. But privately, he is learning a crucial lesson. Power exercised too openly invites destruction. If you are going to dominate an industry, you cannot do it with contracts that can be leaked and revoked. You have to do it with ownership. You have to control the infrastructure itself, not just negotiate favorable terms for using it. and you have to do it quietly, in ways that are difficult to see and harder to stop. The South Improvement scandal also teaches John something else. The public will tolerate almost anything as long as they do not understand it. The moment the scheme was exposed, it was doomed. But all the things Standard Oil had been doing for years, negotiating secret rebates, undercutting competitors, absorbing rival refineries, those had gone largely unnoticed because they were complex, technical, hidden in the machinery of commerce. John decides that from now on, Standard Oil will operate in the shadows. In the wake of the scandal, many of his competitors assume he is weakened, that the failure of the South Improvement scheme will slow his expansion. They are wrong. If anything, the episode makes him more determined. He accelerates his campaign to buy out refineries across the country. He uses the chaos and uncertainty created by the scandal to negotiate even better deals, telling refinery owners that the industry is on the brink of collapse and that Standard Oil is the only safe harbor. And he begins to think seriously about the railroads themselves. The problem with the railroads is that they are outside his control. He can negotiate rates, he can play them against each other, but ultimately, they are independent entities with their own interests. If they decide to raise rates or favor a competitor, there is little he can do. What John needs is an alternative, a way to move oil that does not depend on the railroads at all. The answer is pipelines. In the early 1870s, pipelines are still a new and somewhat experimental technology. The first successful oil pipeline was built in 1865, running just 5 miles from a well to a railroad terminal. By the early 1870s, longer pipelines are being constructed, and they represent a direct threat to the railroad's stranglehold on oil transportation. They are cheaper, faster, and immune to the rate manipulation that has defined the relationship between refiners and railroads. John begins buying pipeline companies, quietly, through intermediaries and subsidiary firms. Standard Oil acquires miles and miles of pipeline in Pennsylvania and Ohio. The railroads do not realize what is happening until it is too late. By the mid-1870s, Standard Oil owns or controls a significant portion of the pipeline infrastructure in the oil regions, and it is building more. Now John has leverage over the railroads. If they raise rates too high, he can simply move his oil through pipelines. The railroads, facing the loss of their largest customer, have no choice but to negotiate. And when they negotiate, John wins. But pipelines are not just a tool for leverage, they are a weapon. Independent refiners who do not have access to Standard Oil's pipelines have to rely on the railroads. And the railroads, knowing they have lost John's business, charge them higher rates to make up the difference. The independents are caught in a vice. They cannot afford to ship by rail, and they cannot access the pipelines. One by one, they fail. One by one, they sell to Standard Oil. By 1877, just 5 years after the South Improvement scandal, Standard Oil controls roughly 90% of the oil refining capacity in the United States. It owns pipelines, railroads cars, warehouses, barrel factories, and distribution networks that stretch across the country and around the world. John Rockefeller has built the most powerful corporation in American history, and he has done it in less than a decade. But he is still not satisfied. Because there is a legal problem, a structural vulnerability that keeps him awake at night. Standard Oil is incorporated in Ohio, which means it can only operate directly in Ohio. All of its holdings in other states, the refineries in New York, the pipelines in Pennsylvania, the distribution centers in Maryland, are technically separate companies, loosely coordinated but not legally unified. This makes the empire fragile. A hostile state legislature could seize assets. A clever lawyer could unravel the corporate structure. Competitors could exploit the gaps. What John needs is a way to unify all of Standard Oil's operations under a single structure, something that transcends state boundaries and operates beyond the reach of any single government. In 1882, he and his lawyers invent a solution. They call it a trust. It is a legal innovation, a way of organizing a corporation that has never been tried before, and it will change American capitalism forever. But it will also make John Rockefeller the most hated man in America. Chapter 5. Horizontal Integration. There is a moment in 1880 when John D. Rockefeller stands in his office and looks at a map of the United States with pins marking every refinery, every pipeline, every distribution terminal that Standard Oil controls. The map is crowded with pins. There are more pins than empty spaces. And John is thinking about the ones that are missing. Horizontal integration. That is what economists will later call it, though John does not use the term. He simply sees it as logic, as the natural conclusion of a single idea. If you control everything at one level of an industry, you control the industry itself. Standard Oil does not drill for oil, it refines oil. And John's strategy has been to acquire every refinery he can reach, to consolidate the refining business into a single, overwhelming entity that can dictate terms to everyone else: the drillers who produce crude oil, the railroads and pipelines that transport it, the distributors who sell kerosene to the public. By 1880, he is close. But close is not enough. There are still independent refineries scattered across the country, holdouts who refuse to sell, who believe they can survive on local markets or niche products, or sheer stubborn pride. John studies each one. He knows their capacity, their debts, their vulnerabilities, and he begins to tighten the noose. In New York, there is a refiner named Charles Pratt, a capable businessman who runs a successful operation in Brooklyn. Pratt has resisted Standard Oil for years, believing that the New York market is large enough to support independent competition. John does not try to destroy Pratt. Instead, he offers him a deal: sell to Standard Oil, but continue to run your refinery as you see fit. You will have autonomy, access to capital, and the backing of the largest corporation in the industry. You will keep your name on the door. Pratt considers the offer. He knows what happens to refiners who refuse. He has watched them fail, watched their businesses collapse under the weight of Standard Oil's advantages. And so he agrees, and his company becomes part of the Standard Oil network. This is John's preferred method. He does not want to humiliate his competitors or grind them into dust, though he will if he must. What he wants is their cooperation, their expertise, their operations folded into his growing machine. He offers fair prices, often generous prices, and he allows former rivals to remain as managers if they are competent. Standard Oil is not just acquiring refineries, it is acquiring talent, knowledge, and market share. No, but not everyone accepts the offer. In Pennsylvania, there are refiners who see Standard Oil as a threat to everything the oil industry was supposed to represent: independence, entrepreneurship, the chance for a man to build something with his own hands. They band together, form associations, pledge to never sell to Rockefeller. They call him a monopolist, a robber baron, an enemy of free enterprise. John does not argue. He simply continues to refine oil more efficiently and more cheaply than they can. He cuts costs everywhere. Standard Oil's chemists develop new processes that extract more kerosene from each barrel of crude, reducing waste to almost nothing. The byproducts that other refineries throw away: gasoline, paraffin, petroleum jelly. Standard Oil finds uses for turning waste into profit. The company builds its own barrels, manufactures its own sulfuric acid, operates its own warehouses. Every step that can be brought in-house is brought in-house, because every middleman eliminated is a cost reduced. And then there are the railroads and pipelines. By the early 1880s, Standard Oil owns or controls the majority of the pipelines running out of the Pennsylvania oil fields. Independent refiners who do not have access to these pipelines must rely on the railroads, and the railroads knowing they have lost Standard Oil's business to the pipelines, charge independents higher rates. The independents complain, they protest, they appeal to state legislatures, but the railroads are private companies, and they can charge what they want. The independents are trapped. They cannot compete with Standard Oil's costs. They cannot access its pipelines, and they cannot afford the railroad rates. One by one, they sell. Some go quietly, grateful for a fair price and a way out. Others sell with bitterness, feeling that they have been forced into a corner with no other choice. John does not lose sleep over this. He believes, genuinely, that he is doing them a favor. The refining business, as he sees it, is not a place for small operators anymore. The margins are too thin, the competition too fierce, the capital requirements too high. Consolidation is inevitable, and consolidation under Standard Oil means efficiency, stability, and the elimination of waste. The oil industry, in his view, is better off with the fewer refineries running at full capacity than with hundreds of refineries running at a loss. But there is another reason for the ruthlessness, one that John rarely articulates, but which drives him nonetheless. He is afraid of losing control. He has built something extraordinary, something unprecedented, and he knows that if he shows weakness, if he allows competitors to survive and grow, they will eventually challenge him. The only way to ensure Standard Oil's survival is to make it so dominant that no competitor can ever threaten it again. By 1882, Standard Oil controls more than 90% of the refining capacity in the United States. It processes nearly 100,000 barrels of oil per day. Its kerosene is sold in every state and in dozens of countries around the world. John Rockefeller is the most powerful industrialist in America, perhaps in the world. But power on this scale creates a problem. How do you organize it? Standard Oil is not one company. It is dozens of companies, refineries in Ohio and New York and Pennsylvania, pipeline companies, distribution firms, barrel factories, shipping operations, each incorporated separately in different states, each technically independent. They are coordinated through informal agreements, through interlocking directorships, through John's personal control. But the structure is fragile, vulnerable to legal challenges, difficult to manage. John and his lawyers begin searching for a solution. They need a way to unify all of Standard Oil's operations under a single legal structure, something that can operate across state lines without running afoul of state corporation laws. And in 1882, they find it. They invent the trust. Chapter 6, The Trust. Imagine a legal structure that does not exist yet, that has no precedent in American law, that will be so powerful and so controversial that it will eventually be banned. That is what John D. Rockefeller and his lawyers create in 1882. The Standard Oil Trust. Here is how it works. All of the shareholders of the various Standard Oil companies, the refinery in Cleveland, the pipeline company in Pennsylvania, the distribution terminal in New York, turn over their stock to a board of 9 trustees. In exchange, they receive trust certificates that represent their share of the combined enterprise. The trustees, led by John Rockefeller, now control all of Standard Oil's operations as a single, unified entity. It is brilliant. It bypasses state corporation laws, which restrict where a company can operate. It consolidates power without consolidating the companies themselves, which remain legally separate. And it creates a structure so complex and so opaque that regulators and competitors cannot easily understand how it works, let alone challenge it. The trust is capitalized at $70 million, an almost incomprehensible sum in 1882. John holds about 40% of the trust certificates, making him one of the wealthiest men in the world, but wealth, for John, is not the point. Control is the point. With the trust in place, Standard Oil operates as a single organism. Decisions that once required coordination between dozens of separate companies can now be made by the 9 trustees, and implemented across the entire network. Refineries in different states share technology. Pipelines are built where they are most efficient. Prices are set uniformly across markets. The result is a level of efficiency that no competitor can match. But the trust is more than just an organizational tool. It is a weapon. Because now, Standard Oil can move into markets with overwhelming force. If a local refinery is competing too effectively, Standard Oil can undercut its prices in that market, while subsidizing the losses with profits from elsewhere. If a pipeline company refuses to cooperate, Standard Oil can build a competing pipeline and run it at a loss until the other company fails. The trust allows Standard Oil to absorb short-term losses in ways that independent operators cannot, and John uses this ability without hesitation. In 1883, a group of independent refiners in Buffalo, New York, forms a cooperative to resist Standard Oil. They pool their resources, negotiate collectively with railroads, and try to undercut Standard Oil's prices in the Buffalo market. John responds by dropping the price of kerosene in Buffalo to below cost. Standard Oil loses money on every gallon it sells there, but it can afford to. The Buffalo refiners cannot. Within 6 months, the cooperative collapses, and Standard Oil absorbs its members. This happens again and again, in city after city. Independent refiners fight back with price wars, with attempts to build their own pipelines, with appeals to state legislatures for protection. But Standard Oil is too large, too well capitalized, too ruthlessly efficient. It can outlast any competitor, outspend any rival, outmaneuver any challenge. By the mid-1880s, Standard Oil is not just dominant. It is a monopoly in every meaningful sense of the word. It controls the refining, transportation, and distribution of oil in the United States. It sets prices. It determines who can enter the market and who cannot. And it operates through the trust structure in a legal gray area that makes it almost impossible to regulate. John oversees all of this from his office at 26 Broadway in New York, a building that becomes synonymous with corporate power. He works long hours, reviews reports from managers across the country, makes decisions about everything from the purchase of new pipelines to the pricing of kerosene in rural Kansas. He is methodical, unemotional, relentless. But he is also increasingly isolated. The trust, for all its efficiency, requires secrecy. Standard Oil does not publish financial statements. It does not explain its decisions to the public. It operates behind closed doors, and John, who has always been private, becomes almost invisible. He does not give interviews. He does not make public speeches. He allows others, Henry Flagler, John Archbold, other executives, to be the public face of the company while he remains in the background, pulling the levers. This secrecy breeds suspicion. Journalists begin to investigate Standard Oil, trying to understand how it became so powerful so quickly. State legislators, responding to pressure from independent oilmen, hold hearings and demand answers. John testifies occasionally, but his answers are careful, legalistic, revealing nothing. He speaks in generalities, denies wrongdoing, insists that Standard Oil's success is due to efficiency and good management, nothing more. And in a sense, he is telling the truth. Standard Oil is more efficient than its competitors. It does produce kerosene more cheaply, transport it more reliably, distribute it more widely. But efficiency achieved through monopoly power, through the crushing of competition, through secret deals and hidden leverage. That is a different kind of efficiency, and the American public is beginning to understand the difference. In 1888, the state of New York launches an investigation into the Standard Oil Trust. The investigation reveals, for the first time, the full scope of the trust's operations. The public learns that Standard Oil controls more than 90% of the nation's refining capacity, that it owns thousands of miles of pipeline, that it has secret agreements with railroads that give it advantages no competitor can match. The findings are published in newspapers across the country. Editorial writers call the trust a threat to democracy, an affront to the principles of free enterprise. Cartoonists draw John Rockefeller as an octopus, its tentacles wrapped around the nation's oil wells, railroads, and legislatures. John does not respond to the cartoons. He does not defend himself in the press. He simply continues to run Standard Oil with the same methodical precision he has always used. But the attacks are beginning to have an effect. In 1890, Congress passes the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first federal law designed to limit monopolies and restrain anti-competitive behavior. The law is vague, untested, and no one is certain how it will be applied. But it is clear that it is aimed, at least in part, at Standard Oil. John and his lawyers study the law carefully. They conclude that the trust structure, while innovative, is vulnerable. If a court rules that the trust violates the Sherman Act, the entire organization could be dismantled. And so they begin to consider alternatives, new ways to organize the company that will preserve its power while avoiding legal challenges. But before they can fully implement a new structure, the attacks intensify. And they come from an unexpected source: a woman with a pen, a personal grudge, and an extraordinary talent for research. Her name is Ida Tarbell, and she is about to do what no competitor, no state legislature, and no federal law has been able to do. She is about to make the American public understand exactly what John D. Rockefeller has built and exactly what it has cost. Chapter 7: Ida Tarbell and the Reckoning. There is a photograph of Ida Tarbell from around 1900. She is in her early 40s, dressed in a high-collared blouse, her dark hair pulled back, her expression serious and intelligent. She does not look like someone who could bring down an empire. But that is exactly what she is about to do. Ida Minerva Tarbell was born in 1857 in a small town in Pennsylvania's oil region, and she grew up surrounded by the boom and chaos of the early oil industry. Her father, Franklin Tarbell, was an independent oilman, not a driller, but a manufacturer of wooden oil tanks. He built a successful business in the 1860s, providing storage for the oil that poured out of the Pennsylvania wells. And then Standard Oil came. Ida was a teenager when she watched her father's business begin to collapse. The railroads, under pressure from Standard Oil, raised their shipping rates for independent operators. The pipelines that her father relied on were bought up by Standard Oil or driven out of business. Orders dried up. Money grew tight. Franklin Tarbell did not lose everything, but he lost enough, and Ida watched him age and harden and grow bitter. She never forgot it. By the 1890s, Ida Tarbell has become one of the most respected journalists in America. She writes for McClure's Magazine, a publication known for serious investigative reporting. She has written acclaimed biographies of Napoleon and Abraham Lincoln. She is meticulous, tireless, and she has a gift for turning dense, complicated subjects into clear, compelling narratives. In 1901, the editor of McClure's, S.S. McClure, approaches her with an idea: write a history of the Standard Oil Company. Not a polemic, not an attack piece, but a thorough factual account of how the company was built and how it operates. McClure believes the story will sell magazines. Ida believes it will be the most important work of her life. She begins her research. For nearly 2 years, Ida travels across the country, interviewing former Standard Oil employees, independent oilmen who were driven out of business, railroad executives, lawyers, politicians. She visits courthouses and digs through public records, corporate filings, legal testimonies, legislative hearings. She obtains internal Standard Oil documents that were never meant to be public. She reads everything, cross-checks everything, verifies everything. What she discovers is a pattern of behavior so systematic, so ruthless, that even she, who grew up hating Standard Oil, is shocked by the scope of it. She learns about the secret rebates with the railroads, the drawbacks paid from competitors' shipping fees. She documents the Cleveland Massacre, the quiet campaign to absorb every refinery in the city. She uncovers the South Improvement Scheme in detail, showing how Rockefeller and his allies tried to create a cartel that would have strangled the entire industry. She traces the growth of the trust, showing how it was designed to operate beyond the reach of state regulation. And she finds the stories, dozens of them, hundreds of them, of individual men who were ruined by Standard Oil, refiners who were forced to sell at a loss, drillers who were cut off from pipelines and markets, businessmen who fought back and were systematically destroyed. In November 1902, the first installment of the history of the Standard Oil Company appears in McClure's magazine. It is calm, factual, devastating. Ida does not write with anger. She does not editorialize. She simply lays out the facts, one after another, showing how Standard Oil gained its power and what it did with that power. She lets the story speak for itself. The public response is immediate and overwhelming. The series becomes a sensation. Each monthly installment is read by hundreds of thousands of people. Newspapers reprint excerpts. Politicians cite her findings in speeches. The articles are discussed in homes, in offices, in union halls, and church basements. For the first time, the American public truly understands what a monopoly looks like from the inside. They see the mechanisms of control, the leverage points, the secret deals. They see how Standard Oil used its size to crush competitors not through better products or better service, but through raw economic power. And they are angry. John Rockefeller does not respond publicly. He does not grant interviews about the series, but privately, he is furious. He believes Ida Tarbell is biased, unfair, motivated by personal revenge for what happened to her father. He tells associates that she does not understand business, that she is twisting facts to create a false narrative. But he cannot deny the facts themselves. Everything Ida reports is documented, verified, taken from public records or sworn testimony. She is careful never to print anything she cannot prove, and that makes her work impossible to dismiss. Standard Oil's lawyers consider suing for libel, but they know they would lose. Everything in the articles is true. The series runs for 19 installments, from November 1902 to October 1904. When it is finished, Ida compiles the articles into a book, adding additional research and documentation. The History of the Standard Oil Company is published in 1904 and becomes an immediate bestseller. The book does something that no legal challenge, no competitor, no government investigation has been able to do. It turns public opinion decisively against Standard Oil. Ida's work becomes a catalyst for the progressive movement, a rallying point for reformers who believe that unchecked corporate power is a threat to democracy. Journalists begin to imitate her methods, investigating other trusts and monopolies. The Beef Trust, the Sugar Trust, the Tobacco Trust. President Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican but also a progressive reformer, begins to speak publicly about the need to regulate large corporations. He calls men like Rockefeller malefactors of great wealth, and he pledges to use the power of the federal government to break up monopolies. In 1906, the federal government files suit against Standard Oil under the Sherman Antitrust Act, charging the company with illegal restraint of trade. The case will take years to work its way through the courts, but the outcome is no longer in doubt. The tide has turned. John Rockefeller, by this time, has stepped back from the day-to-day management of Standard Oil. He is in his late 60s, one of the richest men in the world, and he has begun to focus on philanthropy. But the lawsuit haunts him. He knows that everything he built, the trust, the pipelines, the refineries, the global distribution network, is in jeopardy. He hires the best lawyers money can buy. They argue that Standard Oil's size is a result of efficiency, not illegal behavior. They point to the lower prices that consumers pay for kerosene because of Standard Oil's economies of scale. They insist that the company has not violated the Sherman Act, that it competes fairly in every market. But the government has Ida Tarbell's research, and it has the testimony of hundreds of witnesses, former employees, ruined competitors, railroad executives who participated in the secret rebate schemes. The evidence is overwhelming. In 1909, a federal court rules against Standard Oil. The company appeals to the Supreme Court. And in 1911, the Supreme Court issues its decision. Chapter 8, the Supreme Court. May 15, 1911, Washington, D.C. Chief Justice Edward Douglas White reads the decision in Standard Oil Company of New Jersey v. United States, and with each sentence, an empire fractures. The Supreme Court rules unanimously that Standard Oil has violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. The company, the court finds, has engaged in an unreasonable restraint of trade. It has used its size and power to eliminate competition through means that go beyond normal business practices. It has created a monopoly not through superior efficiency alone, but through systematic suppression of rivals. The remedy is dissolution. Standard Oil must be broken apart. Within 6 months, the company will be divided into 34 separate entities, each independently operated, each competing against the others. The trust that John Rockefeller built, the structure that unified the entire oil industry under a single management, will cease to exist. John is 71 years old when the decision comes down. He has not been actively managing Standard Oil for several years, having handed over control to younger executives. He is living in semi-retirement, dividing his time between his estate in New York and his winter home in Florida. He plays golf nearly every day. He distributes dimes to children and strangers. He attends church faithfully. When he learns of the Supreme Court's decision, he says very little. Those close to him report that he does not seem surprised, and he does not seem devastated. He has known for years that the breakup was coming. The only question was when. But here is the extraordinary thing, the detail that will infuriate his critics and baffle historians. The breakup makes John Rockefeller richer. More. When Standard Oil is divided into 34 companies, John still owns roughly a quarter of the shares in each one. And those companies, Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of New York, Standard Oil of California, and so on, remain enormously profitable. They are no longer coordinated by a central trust, but they are still the largest, most efficient oil companies in their respective markets. And now they can operate openly, without the legal cloud that hung over the trust. They can expand, acquire new businesses, enter new markets. Several of them will eventually become some of the most powerful corporations in the world. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco. All of them are children of Standard Oil. Within a year of the breakup, the combined value of the 34 companies exceeds the value of the trust before dissolution. John's net worth, already immense, grows even larger. By some estimates, he is worth nearly $1 billion by 1913, equivalent to well over $300 billion in today's currency, making him possibly the wealthiest person in human history. The irony is bitter for those who fought to break up Standard Oil. They succeeded in dismantling the monopoly, but they did not succeed in diminishing Rockefeller's wealth or influence. If anything, they increased it. But the Supreme Court decision accomplishes something more important than financial punishment. It establishes a precedent. It affirms that corporate power, no matter how large or how efficiently organized, is subject to the law. It signals that the federal government has the authority and the will to regulate monopolies, to restrain anti-competitive behavior, to intervene when corporations grow so powerful that they threaten the functioning of free markets. The decision reshapes American capitalism. In the years that follow, the government will use the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up other trusts, the Tobacco Trust, the Gunpowder Trust. The progressive movement, energized by the victory over Standard Oil, will push for more regulation. The Federal Trade Commission, the Clayton Antitrust Act, laws protecting labor unions and limiting the power of railroads. John Rockefeller becomes a symbol in all of this, though not the symbol he would have chosen. To progressives and reformers, he is the embodiment of unchecked corporate greed, the robber baron who built a fortune by crushing competitors and manipulating markets. His name is used as shorthand for everything that is wrong with monopoly capitalism. But to others, businessmen, entrepreneurs, economists who study industrial organization, he is something else. He is a genius of efficiency, a man who saw waste and chaos in an industry and brought order to it. He created a company that delivered kerosene more cheaply and more reliably than any competitor, that lit lamps across the world, that made oil a global commodity. Whatever his methods, they resulted in a product that improved millions of lives. John himself, in his rare public statements, insists that he has nothing to apologize for. He believes to the end of his life that Standard Oil was a force for good. He points to the falling price of kerosene during the decades of Standard Oil's dominance, from 58 cents a gallon in 1865 to 7 cents a gallon in 1895. He argues that the trust saved the oil industry from destructive competition, from the boom and bust cycles that ruined drillers and refiners alike. And in a narrow economic sense, he is not entirely wrong. Standard Oil did bring efficiency to the oil industry. It did lower prices. It did create a distribution network that made kerosene available to people who had never had reliable lighting before. But efficiency is not the only value in a democracy. Fairness matters. Opportunity matters. The ability of small operators to compete without being crushed by monopoly power matters. And by the early 20th century, Americans have decided that they care more about preserving competition than about maximizing the efficiency of a single, all-powerful corporation. The Supreme Court decision reflects that choice. John accepts the ruling without bitterness, at least publicly. He does not rage against the government or the courts. He does not try to fight the dissolution. He simply allows it to happen, and he turns his attention to the other project that has consumed the last 2 decades of his life, giving away his money. By 1911, John has already donated tens of millions of dollars to universities, medical research institutions, churches, and charitable organizations. He has established the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which will make groundbreaking contributions to public health. He has funded the University of Chicago, transforming it from a small Baptist college into one of the great research universities in the world. And he is just beginning. In the years after the Standard Oil breakup, John will create a new model for philanthropy, one that approaches charity with the same systematic rigor he brought to business. He will establish foundations, hire experts, fund projects that address root causes rather than symptoms. He will give away more than $500 million during his lifetime, an almost incomprehensible sum, and his philanthropic institutions will continue to operate long after his death. But before we turn to the philanthropist, before we see John Rockefeller as the old man handing out dimes and funding hospitals, there is one more chapter in the Standard Oil story that must be told. Because John did not build his empire alone. He had partners, lieutenants, and eventually he had a son, and the son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., will inherit not just the wealth, but the burden of the name. He will spend his entire life trying to repair his father's reputation, trying to show that the Rockefeller fortune can be a force for good in the world. And he will struggle, in ways his father never did, with the weight of what that fortune represents. Chapter 9. The Philanthropist. There is a moment in 1889 when John D. Rockefeller reads an essay that changes the trajectory of his life. The essay is called The Gospel of Wealth, and it is written by Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate who is, at that moment, one of the few men in America who rivals Rockefeller in wealth and influence. Carnegie's argument is simple but radical. A man who dies rich dies disgraced. Wealth accumulated beyond what is needed for a comfortable life is a public trust, and the man who holds it has a moral obligation to distribute it wisely before he dies. Not to his children. Carnegie believes that leaving vast fortunes to heirs breeds indolence and ruin, but to institutions and causes that will benefit society. John reads the essay in his study. He is 50 years old, wealthier than he ever imagined possible, and he is beginning to feel the weight of it. For years, he has tithed 10% of his income to his Baptist church, a practice he began when he was earning 50 cents a day as a bookkeeper. But 10% of millions of dollars is itself a fortune, and he has been giving more to churches, to schools, to missionary organizations. The requests for money arrive by the hundreds each week. Ministers write asking for funds to build new churches. College presidents ask for endowments. Charities ask for operating expenses. Individuals write desperate letters asking for help with medical bills, business debts, family emergencies. John tries to respond to all of them personally at first, but it is impossible. There are too many, and he cannot evaluate which causes are worthy and which are fraudulent. He begins to feel overwhelmed, burdened by the responsibility of having more money than he can reasonably spend or give away. Carnegie's essay offers a framework, a philosophy. It tells John that giving away his fortune is not just an act of charity, but a moral duty, and that it should be done with the same care and intelligence that he brought to building Standard Oil. John decides that Carnegie is right, but unlike Carnegie, who will give away most of his fortune in large, dramatic gestures, funding libraries, concert halls, universities, John approaches philanthropy the way he approached business, systematically, with careful planning, with an emphasis on long-term impact rather than immediate gratification. He begins by hiring advisors. In 1891, he brings in a Baptist minister named Frederick Taylor Gates, a man with a sharp mind and no patience for sentimental charity. Gates becomes John's chief philanthropic advisor, and together they develop a methodology. Identify root causes, fund research and institutions rather than individuals, measure results, and avoid waste. Gates tells John that giving away money poorly is worse than not giving it away at all because it creates dependency and solves nothing. What the world needs, Gates argues, is not handouts, but investments in knowledge, health, and education, things that will lift people permanently rather than temporarily. John agrees completely. In 1892, he makes his first major philanthropic investment. He gives $600,000 to establish the University of Chicago. It is not a donation to an existing institution, but the founding gift for a new one, a Baptist university that will be built from the ground up with Rockefeller money. Over the next decade, John will give the university more than $35 million, transforming it into one of the premier research institutions in the world. He does not plaster his name all over the campus. He does not demand buildings be named after him. He simply funds the university and lets the scholars do their work. It is a model he will follow for the rest of his life. Give generously, set clear goals, hire competent people, and then step back. In 1901, John establishes the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, the first institution in the United States dedicated entirely to biomedical research. He hires the best scientists in the world and gives them resources and freedom to pursue long-term, high-risk projects that might take decades to bear fruit. The Institute will make pioneering contributions to the understanding of infectious diseases, developing treatments for meningitis, yellow fever, and pneumonia. Its researchers will win Nobel Prizes. It will save millions of lives. But even as John pours millions into philanthropy, his public reputation continues to darken. The attacks on Standard Oil intensify. Ida Tarbell's articles are published. The government files its antitrust suit. John is vilified in the press, depicted as a greedy, ruthless monopolist who built his fortune by crushing competitors. And then, in 1914, something happens that nearly destroys him. A coal mining strike in Ludlow, Colorado turns violent. The mines are owned by the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, a company that John controls through his investments. The miners, mostly immigrant workers, are striking for better pay, safer conditions, and the right to unionize. The company refuses to negotiate. Tensions escalate. The Colorado National Guard is called in. On April 20th, 1914, the Guard attacks a tent colony where striking miners and their families are living. Gunfire erupts. Tents are set ablaze. When the smoke clears, more than 20 people are dead, including 2 women and 11 children, who suffocated in a pit beneath a burning tent. The event becomes known as the Ludlow Massacre, and the public blames John Rockefeller. It does not matter that John was not in Colorado, that he did not order the attack, that he had delegated management of the company to executives on the ground. He is the owner. He is the source of the money that pays the guards and the company managers. In the eyes of the public, the blood is on his hands. The outcry is ferocious. Protesters march outside John's New York office, carrying signs that call him a murderer. Editorial writers demand he be prosecuted. Union leaders call for a nationwide boycott of Standard Oil products. John receives death threats. His family is placed under guard. For the first time in his life, John seems genuinely shaken. He issues a public statement expressing regret for the loss of life. But the statement is legalistic, defensive, insufficient. The anger does not subside. It is John D. Rockefeller Jr., his son, who finally steps in and tries to repair the damage. Junior, as he is called, is 39 years old, deeply religious, and far more concerned with public opinion than his father has ever been. He travels to Colorado, tours the mining camps, meets with workers and their families. He listens. He promises reforms, better wages, safer conditions, a company union to represent workers' grievances. The reforms are genuine, and over time they begin to change conditions in the Colorado mines. But the damage to the Rockefeller name is immense. Ludlow becomes a symbol of everything that is wrong with industrial capitalism, of the human cost of unchecked corporate power. John, in his mid-70s by this point, begins to withdraw further from public life. He stops giving interviews entirely. He rarely appears in public. He spends his days playing golf, tending to his gardens, and overseeing his philanthropic projects from a distance. But the giving continues, and it accelerates. In 1913, John establishes the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the first modern philanthropic foundations. It is endowed with over $100 million, and its mission is sweeping: to promote the well-being of humanity throughout the world. The foundation will fund public health campaigns that eradicate hookworm in the American South, fight yellow fever in South America, and nearly eliminate malaria in several countries. It will fund scientific research, support education, and invest in projects that aim to address poverty, disease, and ignorance at their roots. John gives with the same intensity he brought to building Standard Oil. By the time of his death, he will have donated more than $500 million, over $10 billion in today's currency, to universities, medical research, public health, and educational initiatives. His foundations will continue to operate for decades, shaping fields from medicine to agriculture to social science. And yet, even as he gives away his fortune, John remains one of the most hated men in America. The public cannot reconcile the philanthropist with the monopolist. They see the hospitals and universities he funds, but they also remember the competitors he crushed, the workers who died at Ludlow, the secret deals and ruthless tactics that built Standard Oil. John, for his part, does not seem to need public approval. He believes with absolute conviction that he has lived a moral life. He has built a great company that brought order to a chaotic industry, that delivered a product millions of people needed, that created wealth not just for himself, but for shareholders, employees, and the communities where Standard Oil operated. And he has given away that wealth in ways that will benefit humanity for generations. In his own mind, he has nothing to apologize for. But there is one person whose opinion matters to him more than the public's, more than the journalists, and the politicians, and the reformers. And that person is struggling under a weight that John himself never had to carry. His son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., the man who will inherit the fortune and the name and the impossible task of making the world forget what his father did to earn it. Chapter 10. Rockefeller and Rockefeller Jr. Picture a boy growing up in the largest mansion in New York, surrounded by servants and tutors, with more money than he can comprehend, and a last name that half the country despises. That is John D. Rockefeller Jr., born in 1874, the only son among 5 children, the heir to the greatest fortune in American history. His childhood is strange, caught between extremes. On one hand, he lives in unimaginable privilege, a mansion on West 54th Street with dozens of rooms, summer homes, private tutors, every material comfort. On the other hand, his father insists on raising him with the values of a middle-class Baptist family. John Sr. gives his children small allowances and requires them to keep account books, just as he did as a child. They are expected to do chores, to attend church every Sunday, to tithe a portion of their pocket of money to charity. John Sr. wants his son to understand the value of money, to respect it, to see it as a tool and a responsibility rather than an indulgence. But Junior is not his father. He does not have the same hunger, the same ruthlessness, the same ability to compartmentalize. Where John Sr. is confident and decisive, Junior is anxious and introspective. Where the father sees business as a game to be won, the son sees it as a burden to be carried. Junior attends Brown University, where he is a serious, dutiful student. He does not drink or carouse. He does not make close friends easily. He is known as shy, earnest, overly formal. His classmates call him John D. behind his back, sometimes with affection, sometimes with mockery. He graduates in 1897 and returns to New York, where his father expects him to join the family business. But by this time, Standard Oil is under siege. The government investigations are intensifying. Ida Tarbell is preparing her expose. The Rockefeller name is becoming synonymous with greed and monopoly. And Junior, sensitive and conscientious in ways his father never was, feels the weight of it. He joins Standard Oil's offices at 26 Broadway, but he does not take to the work. He is competent with numbers, diligent in his duties, but he has no passion for the oil business. What he cares about, what keeps him awake at night, is the family's reputation. He is horrified by the attacks on his father, by the cartoons depicting John Sr. as an octopus strangling the nation, by the public hatred directed at the Rockefeller name. And then comes Ludlow. The massacre in Colorado happens when Junior is 40 years old and serving on the board of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. He did not order the violence. He was not in Colorado, but he was responsible, in the legal and moral sense, for the company's policies. And when the public demands accountability, it is Junior who steps forward. He travels to Colorado in 1915, a year after the massacre. He goes into the mining camps, something his father would never have done. He descends into the mines, eats meals with the workers, listens to their grievances. He is genuinely moved by what he sees. The dangerous conditions, the company towns where workers are paid in scrip that can only be spent at company stores, the lack of basic safety measures. Junior returns to New York and implements reforms. He establishes a company union, improves housing and working conditions, raises wages. The reforms are real, not just public relations gestures, but they come too late to undo the damage to the Rockefeller name, and Junior knows it. He makes a decision then that will define the rest of his life. He will dedicate himself not to business, but to philanthropy. He will take his father's fortune and use it to build things, to fund causes, to try to show the world that the Rockefeller money can be a force for good. In 1921, Junior begins funding the restoration of Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, a project that will take decades and tens of millions of dollars. He buys land to create national parks, Grand Teton, Acadia, donating it to the federal government. He funds the construction of Riverside Church in New York, the Cloisters Museum, Rockefeller Center. He supports the League of Nations, public health initiatives, educational programs. But the project that will define him, the one that will become his greatest legacy, begins in the late 1920s when he decides to build Rockefeller Center in the heart of Manhattan. The timing is catastrophic. Junior begins construction in 1930, just as the Great Depression is tightening its grip on the nation. Banks are failing, businesses are closing, millions are unemployed. Building a massive commercial complex in the middle of an economic collapse seems insane. But Junior persists. He sees Rockefeller Center not just as a real estate investment, but as a symbol, a statement that the future will be better, that New York will endure, that the Rockefellers are contributing to the city rather than extracting from it. He pours his own money into the project when investors pull out. He hires thousands of workers at a time when jobs are nearly impossible to find. The construction takes years. The complex eventually includes 14 buildings, theaters, office space, shops, public plazas. It is Art Deco elegance on a massive scale, and when it is finished, it transforms Midtown Manhattan. Rockefeller Center becomes one of the most successful real estate developments in American history. But more importantly, it becomes a beloved part of the city's identity. And yet, even as Junior builds and donates and tries to rehabilitate the family name, he remains in his father's shadow. Every article about his philanthropy mentions Standard Oil. Every profile of Junior includes a paragraph about the monopoly, the trust, the antitrust case. He cannot escape it. The relationship between father and son is complicated. John Sr. is proud of Junior, grateful for his loyalty, appreciative of his efforts. But he does not entirely understand him. The father cannot comprehend why the son cares so much about public opinion, why he feels such guilt about the fortune, why he apologizes for things that John Sr. believes need no apology. They meet regularly, especially as John Sr. ages. They discuss the philanthropic foundations, review proposals, make decisions about grants. The father is in his 80s and 90s now, still sharp, still engaged, but increasingly frail. He plays golf almost daily, famously handing out dimes to children and caddies, a gesture that becomes a trademark of his later years. The dimes are strange, almost pathological. Here is a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, handing out 10-cent coins as if they are great gifts. Some see it as charming, a symbol of his frugality and common of touch. Others see it as grotesque, a final insult from a man who built his fortune by taking far more than he ever gave. John Sr. does not seem to care what people think. He hands out his dimes with a smile, poses for photographs, and goes about his day. In 1937, John D. Rockefeller Sr. dies at his winter home in Ormond Beach, Florida. He is 97 years old. He has outlived most of his critics, most of his competitors, and most of the people who knew him in his prime. He dies peacefully, surrounded by family, still the richest man who has ever lived. The obituaries are long and conflicted. They recount his achievements, the building of Standard Oil, the transformation of the oil industry, the vast philanthropic legacy. But they also recount the ruthlessness, the monopoly, the human cost. History does not know what to make of John D. Rockefeller, and neither does the nation he helped shape. Junior inherits the bulk of the fortune, and with it, the responsibility of being a Rockefeller in the 20th century. He continues his father's philanthropic work, expanding the foundations, funding new causes. He lives modestly by the standards of his wealth, attends church faithfully, and works tirelessly to support projects that benefit the public. But he never escapes the shadow. In every speech he gives, in every interview he grants, the questions come back to Standard Oil, to the monopoly, to his father's legacy, and Junior, polite and patient, answers them as best he can. He defends his father's achievements while acknowledging the controversies. He insists that the fortune is being used for good, and he points to the hospitals and universities and parks as proof. Junior has 6 children, and he raises them with the same mixture of privilege and discipline that he experienced. Among them is a son named Nelson, who will become governor of New York and vice president of the United States. Another son, David, will become one of the most powerful bankers in the world. The Rockefeller name will continue to shape American life for generations. But the question that haunted John Sr. and tormented Junior will never be fully answered. Can a fortune built through monopoly and ruthlessness be redeemed through charity? Can you do enough good to balance the harm? Can you buy your way to absolution? Junior spends his entire life trying to answer yes, and the world, watching him build and donate and apologize, remains divided. Chapter 11, Ludlow and Legacy, April 20th, 1914. Dawn breaks over a tent colony in the high desert of southern Colorado. The air is cold and thin, and smoke rises from camp stoves, where women are preparing breakfast for striking miners and their families. There are perhaps 1,200 people living in this makeshift community. Greek immigrants, Italian immigrants, Slavic families who came to America for work and found themselves trapped in a system that owns not just their labor, but their homes, their stores, the very ground they walk on. They have been on strike for 7 months, demanding recognition of their union, safer working conditions, an end to the company store system that keeps them perpetually in debt. The Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, controlled by the Rockefeller family, has refused every demand. And now, surrounding the tent colony on 3 sides, is the Colorado National Guard. What happens next will haunt the Rockefeller name for generations. The shooting starts around 9 in the morning. Accounts differ on who fires first, but within minutes, the camp is under sustained attack. Machine gun fire rakes the tents. Families dive into pits they have dug beneath the canvas for exactly this purpose, cramped earthen shelters that offer the only protection. The firing continues for hours. At some point, witnesses will later disagree about when and how several tents catch fire. By the time the sun sets, more than 20 people are dead. Among them are 2 women and 11 children who suffocated in a pit beneath a burning tent while trying to hide from the gunfire. Their bodies are found the next morning, tangled together in the darkness underground. The event becomes known as the Ludlow Massacre, and within days, the story spreads across the country. Newspapers publish photographs of the burned tent colony, of the bodies, of grieving families. Labor unions organize protests. 10,000 people march in New York City, carrying signs that say, "Rockefeller, murder of children," and "Is this America or Russia?" John D. Rockefeller Sr. is in his mid-70s, semi-retired, spending most of his time between his estate in New York and his winter home in Florida. He does not manage the day-to-day operations of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. That responsibility falls to his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., who sits on the company's board of directors. But the public does not care about organizational charts or lines of authority. They see the Rockefeller name on the company, they see dead children, and they draw a straight line between the two. Junior in New York is devastated. He has never been to the mines in Colorado. He has never met the workers or toured the camps. He relied on the company's managers to handle labor relations, and those managers assured him that the strike was the work of outside agitators, that the workers were content, that force was necessary to maintain order. Now he knows they lied. The attacks on the family intensify. Anarchists target Rockefeller properties. A bomb explodes at Junior's townhouse, though no one is hurt. Protests continue for months. The press, already hostile to the Rockefellers because of Standard Oil, seizes on Ludlow as proof that the family's wealth is built on exploitation and violence. John Sr. issues a public statement. It is carefully worded, drafted by lawyers, and it satisfies no one. He expresses regret for the loss of life, but insists that the company was within its rights to protect its property and that the strike was illegal. He does not apologize. He does not take responsibility. But Junior cannot live with that response. Something breaks in him after Ludlow. Some barrier between the world he thought he lived in and the world as it actually is. He begins to understand, in a way his father never did, that owning a company means owning its consequences. That wealth creates obligations. That power, even when delegated to managers hundreds of miles away, still carries moral weight. In 1915, Junior travels to Colorado. He goes alone without bodyguards or public relations advisors. He visits the mining camps, descends into the mines in work clothes, eats meals with the miners and their families. He listens to their stories, the 12-hour shifts, the dangerous equipment, the company stores that charged inflated prices, the guards who beat union organizers. He meets with the widows from Ludlow. He does not make excuses. He does not defend the company. He simply listens, and he apologizes. The workers are suspicious at first. They assume this is a publicity stunt, a way to soften the company's image without changing anything substantive. But Junior keeps coming back. He spends weeks in Colorado, touring mine after mine, asking questions, taking notes. And when he returns to New York, he begins implementing reforms. He hires a labor relations expert named William Lyon Mackenzie King, a Canadian who will later become Prime Minister of Canada. Together they develop what they call the Colorado Industrial Plan, a system that gives workers a voice in company decisions through elected representatives, improves safety conditions, raises wages, and ends the company store monopoly. The plan is not a full union, and labor leaders criticize it as a compromise that does not go far enough, but it is a genuine reform, and it changes conditions in the Colorado mines significantly. More importantly, it changes Junior. He becomes obsessed with labor relations, with industrial fairness, with the idea that corporations have responsibilities beyond profit. But the damage to the Rockefeller reputation is permanent. Ludlow becomes a symbol, a shorthand for the human cost of industrial capitalism. For the rest of his life, whenever Junior gives a speech or funds a project, someone in the audience or the press will bring up Ludlow, the dead children, the burning tents, the machine guns. And Junior, patient and penitent, will explain what he has learned, what he has tried to change, what he hopes the Rockefeller fortune can now accomplish. He will point to the hospitals and universities and parks as evidence that the money is being used for good, but he will never claim that it is enough. He will never say that the ledger is balanced. John Sr., in contrast, seems largely unmoved by Ludlow. He is in his late 70s when it happens, and by that point, he has developed a capacity to separate himself emotionally from the consequences of his business decisions. He believes sincerely that he ran his companies fairly, that labor unrest is the result of outside agitators rather than legitimate grievances, that violence is sometimes necessary to maintain order. He continues his daily routine: golf, church, correspondence, philanthropic planning. He hands out dimes. He plays with his grandchildren. He oversees the foundations that bear his name. And he does not, as far as anyone can tell, lose sleep over the miners who died in Colorado. This is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of John D. Rockefeller's character, his ability to live with contradiction. He is a devout Baptist who believes in divine judgment, yet he shows no remorse for the competitors he crushed. He is a generous philanthropist who gives away hundreds of millions of dollars, yet he fought viciously against paying his workers fair wages. He is a man who preaches efficiency and order, yet he presided over a system that led to preventable deaths. Junior cannot live with that contradiction. It eats at him, drives him, shapes every decision he makes for the rest of his life. He will spend decades trying to redeem the family name, trying to prove that the Rockefeller fortune can be a force for healing rather than harm. But he will always be haunted by Ludlow, by the knowledge that his name was on the company that killed those children, by the understanding that wealth, no matter how carefully given away, cannot undo what was done to earn it. And as John Sr. enters his final years, as he becomes an old man playing golf in Florida, handing out dimes and smiling for photographers, the question of legacy looms larger. What will history remember about John D. Rockefeller, the monopolist or the philanthropist, the man who crushed competitors or the man who funded universities, the captain of industry or the robber baron? The answer, perhaps, is all of it. Because John D. Rockefeller is not a simple story with a clear moral. He is a contradiction, an embodiment of American capitalism in all its creative and destructive power, and the legacy he leaves behind is just as conflicted as the man himself. Chapter 12, The Final Years. There is a photograph from 1930. John D. Rockefeller is 91 years old, standing on a golf course in Florida, wearing knickers and a flat cap, holding a club. His face is lean and deeply lined, but his eyes are still sharp. He is smiling slightly, the way a man smiles when he knows he has outlived everyone who tried to destroy him. By this point, he has been retired from Standard Oil for more than 2 decades. The company has been broken up by the Supreme Court, split into 34 pieces, and those pieces have grown so valuable that John's fortune has multiplied even in dissolution. He is, by any measure, the richest human being in history, and he is spending his final years in a routine of meticulous simplicity. He wakes early, eats a light breakfast, usually toast and milk, occasionally an egg. He reads the Bible and the newspapers, though he pays less attention to the news than he once did. The world is changing in ways that baffle him. Jazz music, short skirts, automobiles everywhere, women voting. He does not approve of much of it, but he does not waste energy fighting it either. Dirt. Around mid-morning, he plays golf. He plays almost every day, 9 holes, sometimes 18 if he is feeling strong. He is not particularly good, but he is methodical, and he keeps score carefully. His caddies know him well. They know that he will hand each of them a dime at the end of the round, that he will ask about their families, that he will sometimes quote scripture. The dime giving has become a ritual, almost a compulsion. He hands out dimes to children on the street, to hotel staff, to anyone who speaks to him. Some people are delighted. Others are bewildered or offended. Here is the richest man in the world offering them 10 cents as if it is a meaningful gift. But John does not see the irony. To him, the dime represents thrift, discipline, the value of small savings. It is a symbol of the principles that made him wealthy, and he believes he is teaching a lesson with each coin he distributes. After golf, he returns home for lunch, usually something bland and easy to digest. His health is fragile. He has suffered from digestive problems for decades, a condition that some biographers attribute to stress, though John himself never acknowledges stress as something that affects him. He eats carefully, sparingly, and he takes long naps in the afternoon. In the evenings, he sits in his study and goes over reports from the Rockefeller Foundation, the General Education Board, the various philanthropic initiatives that now consume the fortune he spent his life building. He reads proposals for new grants, asks sharp questions about efficiency and outcomes, approves funding for projects that meet his standards. He is still giving away money at an astonishing rate. By the 1930s, he has donated more than $500 million, equivalent to tens of billions today. The money is funding medical research that will save millions of lives, universities that will train generations of leaders, public health campaigns that are eradicating diseases across the globe. And yet, even now, in his 90s, he remains controversial. When he makes a rare public appearance, protesters sometimes gather. Union activists still blame him for Ludlow. Critics still call him a robber baron. Editorials still debate whether his philanthropy absolves the methods he used to earn the money. John does not respond to the criticism. He has long since stopped caring what the newspapers say. He believes with absolute certainty that he lived a righteous life, that Standard Oil was a force for good, that his wealth was earned through intelligence and discipline rather than theft or exploitation. And he believes that he is using that wealth in ways that honor God and benefit humanity. Whether the world agrees is not his concern. In 1935, John celebrates his 96th birthday. He is frail now, his movements slow, his hearing diminished, but his mind remains clear, and he continues to oversee his philanthropic empire with the same attention to detail he brought to building Standard Oil. He spends most of his time at his estate in Ormond Beach, Florida, a sprawling property called The Casements. The house is elegant, but not ostentatious. John has never been interested in displays of wealth. What he values is order, routine, control over his environment. The estate is meticulously maintained. The staff is efficient and loyal. Everything runs smoothly, just as he prefers. His family visits regularly. Junior comes often, bringing reports and proposals, discussing foundation business. The grandchildren come less frequently. They are busy with their own lives, their own ambitions. Nelson is pursuing a political career. David is working in banking. The family is expanding, spreading across the country, taking the Rockefeller name into new arenas of power and influence. John is proud of them, though he worries sometimes that they do not understand what he built, what it took to build it, what it means to carry the name. They have grown up with wealth, and wealth that comes easily is wealth that can be wasted. He has tried to teach them discipline, thrift, responsibility, but he knows that lessons learned from a grandfather are not the same as lessons learned from necessity. On May 23, 1937, John D. Rockefeller dies in his sleep at the Casements. He is 97 years old. The cause is arteriosclerosis, a hardening of the arteries, though in truth he simply wears out, like a machine that has run for too long without rest. The funeral is private, attended by family and a few close associates. There are no grand public ceremonies, no lying in state. John specified in his will that he wanted a simple service, and the family honors that wish. He is buried in Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, the city where he built his first refinery, the city where Standard Oil began. The obituaries are long and conflicted. The New York Times runs a front-page story that spans multiple pages, recounting his life in exhaustive detail. They describe the building of Standard Oil, the antitrust case, the philanthropy. They quote critics who call him a monopolist and defenders who call him a genius. They note, almost in wonder, the sheer scale of what he accomplished, the wealth he accumulated, the industry he dominated, the institutions he funded. But they do not reach a conclusion. They do not say whether John D. Rockefeller was a hero or a villain, whether his life was a triumph or a tragedy. They simply present the facts and let readers decide for themselves. And the readers, like the historians who will study him for decades to come, remain divided. Some see John Rockefeller as the embodiment of the American dream, a poor boy who built the greatest fortune in history through intelligence, discipline, and relentless ambition. They point to the fact that he made kerosene affordable for millions of people, that he brought order to a chaotic industry, that he gave away more money than any philanthropist before him. Others see him as a cautionary tale, a man who amassed wealth through ruthless monopoly, who crushed competitors without mercy, whose fortune was built on the broken dreams of thousands of smaller businessmen and the lives of workers like those who died at Ludlow. They argue that his philanthropy, however generous, cannot erase the harm he caused, cannot redeem the methods he used. The truth, perhaps, is that John D. Rockefeller was both. He was a man of extraordinary vision and extraordinary ruthlessness. He built something unprecedented and did it through means that violated the principles of fair competition. He gave away a fortune with genuine generosity and did it with money that many believed he should never have had in the first place. He was a devout Christian who showed no mercy to his competitors. He was a careful, methodical thinker who made decisions that ruined lives. He was a loving father and husband who presided over a company that led to the deaths of women and children. He was a genius of organization and a master of exploitation. He was, in other words, a complete and complicated human being, neither saint nor demon, and his legacy is as conflicted as the man himself. In the decades after his death, the Rockefeller fortune continues to shape the world. The foundations he established fund the research that leads to vaccines, antibiotics, the Green Revolution in agriculture. Rockefeller University becomes one of the premier biomedical research institutions in the world. The University of Chicago, built with his money, produces dozens of Nobel Prize winners. The parks and museums and institutions he funded become beloved parts of American life. But Standard Oil's legacy is equally enduring. The company's breakup creates the modern oil industry, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and others that dominate energy markets for a century. The antitrust laws used to dismantle Standard Oil become the foundation for regulating corporate power in America. The debate over monopoly and competition, over the proper role of government in restraining corporate excess, continues to this day. And the name Rockefeller remains synonymous with wealth, power, and the complicated relationship between the two. It is a name that opens doors and raises suspicions, that carries privilege and burden in equal measure. Junior, in the years after his father's death, continues his work of redemption. He builds Rockefeller Center, donates land for the United Nations headquarters, funds countless philanthropic projects. He spends the rest of his life trying to prove that the Rockefeller fortune can be a force for good, that his father's legacy can be more than oil and monopoly. But he never escapes the shadow, and perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps the lesson of the Rockefeller story is that some legacies cannot be simplified, cannot be reduced to good or evil, cannot be judged by a single measure. John D. Rockefeller built an empire and gave away a fortune. He was brilliant and ruthless, generous and merciless, a man of faith and a man of business. And the world he shaped, for better and worse, is the world we still live in.